The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. Now a man was ill, Lazarus from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who had anointed the Lord with perfumed oil and dried his feet with her hair. It was her brother Lazarus who was ill. So the sisters of Lazarus sent word to Jesus saying, "Master, the one you love is ill." When Jesus heard this, he said, "This illness is not to end in death, but is for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified through it." Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that he was ill, he remained for 2 days in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to his disciples, "Let us go back to Judea." The disciples said to him, "Rabbi, the Jews were just trying to stone you, and you want to go back there?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours in a day? If one walks during the day, he does not stumble, but he sees the light of this world. But if one walks at night, he stumbles because the light is not in him." He said this and then told them, "Our friend Lazarus is asleep, but I am going to awaken him." So the disciples said to him, "Master, if he's asleep, he will be saved." But Jesus was talking about his death, while they thought that he meant ordinary sleep. So then Jesus said to them clearly, "Lazarus has died, and I'm glad for you that I was not there, that you may believe. Let us go to him." So Thomas, called Didymus, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us also go to die with him." When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, only about 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him, but Mary sat at home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise." Martha said to him, "I know he will rise in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus told her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, even if he dies, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord. I have come to believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, the one who is coming into the world." When she had said this, she went and called her sister Mary secretly, saying, "The teacher is here and asking for you." As soon as she heard this, she rose quickly and went to him. For Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still where Martha had met him. So when the Jews who were with her in the house comforting her saw Mary get up quickly and go out, they followed her, presuming that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would never have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her weeping, he became perturbed and deeply troubled, and said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Sir, come and see." And Jesus wept. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him?" But some of them said, "Could not the one who opened the eyes of the blind man have done something so that this man would not have died?" So Jesus, perturbed again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay across it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the dead man's sister, said to him, "Lord, by now there will be a stench. He has been dead for 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believe you will see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone, and Jesus raised his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you for hearing me. I know that you always hear me, but because of the crowd here, I have said this, that they may believe that you sent me." And when he said this, he cried out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The dead man came out, tied hand and foot with burial bands, and his face was wrapped in a cloth. So Jesus said to them, "Untie him and let him go." Now many of the Jews who had come to Mary and seen what he had done began to believe in him. The Gospel of the Lord. Once upon a time, there was a little boy who was afraid of the dark. So one night, his mother told him to go out in the back porch and to bring her the broom. The little boy turned to the mother and said, "Mama, I don't want to go out there. It's dark." The mother smiled reassuringly at her son. "Son, you don't have to be afraid of the dark," she explained. "Jesus is out there. He'll look after you and protect you." The little boy looked at the mother real hard and asked, "Are you sure he's out there?" "Honey, I'm sure. He's everywhere, and he's always ready to help you when you need him." The little boy thought about for just a minute and then went to the back door and cracked it open just a little bit and whispered, "Jesus, if you're out there, could you please hand me that broom?" Today's gospel contains probably one of the most powerful stories in the New Testament, the raising of Jesus' dear friend Lazarus from the dead. Now, we only hear about this particular story in John's gospel. We do have accounts, for instance, in Mark chapter 5, where Jesus resuscitates a little girl who had died. In Luke chapter 7, he resuscitates a young boy who had died. But here and here only do we hear this story about Lazarus being raised. Now, Luke in chapter 10 will tell us about Martha and Mary, the two sisters, in a whole different context. But here we come to find out that Jesus would actually spend a lot of time with them as he traveled back and forth to Jerusalem. Well, as the story opens up, we have here the very last miracle performed by Jesus. In fact, this story will close the first section of John's gospel. There are two sections. The book of signs, where John will stick his 7 miracle stories about Jesus, and then we will shift next week into what's known as the book of glory, beginning in chapter 15 to the end. But here we find Jesus performing his most important miracle. As the story opens up, Jesus is outside of Jerusalem, a couple days' journey at least, when all of a sudden he receives news that his dear friend Lazarus is taken seriously ill. What does Jesus do? He stays exactly where he is. In fact, he'll wait a couple more days. Why? Well, when Jesus finally announces to his disciples that Lazarus has fallen asleep, as usual, they misunderstand what he's talking about. They think that Lazarus is snoring, but Jesus is trying to communicate them that Lazarus is actually dead. And when he tells them, they're a bit shocked. They wonder why you didn't go sooner. Why did you wait this long? And Jesus says to them, "So that you may see the glory of God." This miracle was meant to open their eyes in a way that they had never been opened before in faith. And so once Jesus gets to a little town called Bethany, the residence of Martha and Mary and where Lazarus used to live, Martha's the first one to come running up to Jesus. But she's always busy, it seems. But this time she comes with a rather pathetic statement. She looks at the Lord and she says, "Lord, if you had been here, our brother would never have died." To which Jesus responds, "Well, he's not going to die." And she says, "Well, I know he's going to rise again in the resurrection." And then Jesus corrects her immediately. Because you see, the Jews at the time, many of the Jews, believed that there would be a resurrection, but only at the end of time, when the kingdom would come in its fullness, and everybody would raise up at the same time. But you see, Jesus is going to show her that there's another resurrection, not just something to take place at the end of time, but right here and now. And he will say to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Martha's response, she surrenders completely to the Lord. She says to him, I believe you are the Messiah, the Son of God. Get this, not one of the apostles, not one of them has at this point called Jesus for what he is. Only the sister Martha. Mary, the other sister, finally comes out and she says the same thing to the Lord. If you had been here, our brother would never have died. And at that point, Jesus has had enough. He has had all he wants to hear and see. And he does something that really reveals the true meaning of this passage. We are told in this translation that he is filled with emotion and that he shudders. Well, I would like to suggest to you that translation of those two very powerful Greek verbs is very inadequate. Go to the King James Version, the same. It's hard to translate these two words into English. And so what do they mean? Well, the first verb, embramaste, means simply to shudder, to shake like this. Now, why did Jesus have this shaking almost to the point of convulsions? Because of the other Greek verb, terasane, which means that Jesus was stricken at the level of the bowels, literally. You see, the ancient Greeks believed that the emotions did not come from the heart as we believe. I love you with all my heart. They believed that they came from your intestines, your bowels. And so what John is trying to say to us, if you can imagine, Jesus is so worked up that he's shaking and the emotion is absolutely at the level of his guts. A powerful emotion. Have you ever had that kind of feeling? Well, Jesus does. And why? For one very important reason. Death is the ugliest manifestation of evil. Finally, Jesus has come face to face with his biggest enemy, evil, and he doesn't like it, and he's going to do something about it. Ultimately on Calvary, but here to teach a lesson. And the scene that ensues is wonderful. He wants to know where they put him, and they said, well, Lazarus is in that tomb up there. And so he orders them to roll back the stone, and he calls out to Lazarus, Lazarus, come out. And he comes, wrapped head to toe like a mummy. And then that beautiful command, untie him and let him go free. I thought a lot for years about that particular reaction of Jesus. Maybe you've had a similar reaction in your life. Can you imagine being so worked up that you literally were shaking because you went up against something that you would consider your biggest fear, your biggest threat, your biggest enemy? But you see, Jesus, for him, that was no big deal. He was going to deal with it right there on the spot. Jesus did not like evil, but he was facing it right there in the death of his friend. And he conquered it on the spot. What does this mean for us? Well, I want to tell you what this passage meant for me years ago when I really finally sat down and translated those verbs. And I meditated on those verbs to try to understand what they could mean for me. And what it boiled down to was me asking myself, what am I afraid of in this life? What scares me the most in this life? And probably with most of us, more than what that little boy experienced in the first story about darkness. But we fear death. And you know what? Once I realized the magnitude of this passage, and what Jesus felt and what he did to deal with it, I no longer fear death. Basically, I fear nothing. Because the ugliest thing to be feared would have been death if Jesus never came on the scene. And so I think about situations in this life that I've experienced that used to shake me up, that used to bother me. When you look at evil and its manifestations, and they are many in this world, makes you wonder what Jesus would have felt. I was sharing with the people this weekend probably one of the ugliest scenes that I remember as a Catholic priest. And I remember it was December 24th, 1986, when I was stationed in Weirton, West Virginia, and I received a call not too long before the midnight Christmas Mass that a little baby had born and died shortly after birth, just a few moments after birth. And I remember being really grief-stricken at the level of the heart. I didn't feel like going out and do the midnight Mass because everybody was happy and festive, and I knew somewhere in Weirton there was a couple that was absolutely sick with grief. But what really happened to make this scene ugly would be on December 26th, the afternoon of the little baby's burial. We were at St. Paul Cemetery Mausoleum, and there was the mother looking absolutely numb along with her husband, the father of the child. The father's family was there, but what I didn't see was the family of the mother. Where were they, I wondered? Well, we did the service, and then when it was all over, I asked the person from the funeral home, I said, well, where are you going to bury the little baby? And he said, well, after the next service. And I said, well, what do you mean another service? He said, well, as soon as we clear out here, the family of the mother's coming in, they're bringing their own minister because they don't like Catholics. And I remember thinking to myself, how absolutely pathetic that when people should be grieving over a little baby that was born dead, they're fighting with one another over religious ideologies. How stupid, how illogical, how crazy that was. And all I could think of was, I could see Jesus right there at that cemetery chapel, shuddering with emotion, that hatred had to get in the way of grieving. For years, I went up to Pittsburgh, right off Fifth Avenue. There's a very dark, dingy, dirty little street. And right at the center of that street on one side is an abortion mill. And we would go up there, I would go up there year after year to spend time in prayer. And the federal law only allows you to be within a certain number of feet from the abortion mill. And I call it a mill, by the way, because an abortion clinic is a misnomer. A clinic is where people go to get well. A mill is where things are destroyed. But I remember over there one day, one of my first visits there, standing across the street and watching the young women come to go in to get their abortions. The facade in front of the mill was a used bookstore, believe it or not. And most of the women on all of my visits that would come walking up the street for their scheduled appointment would be alone. No one would be with them. And then these pro-abortion escorts would go after them and surround them and lead them into the mill like a spider taking its newly found prey into the heart of its nest. It was absolutely incredible, and how I wonder what Jesus would say there. Certainly he would have shuddered, not just because of the loss of a life, but because of the fact that abortion is a business. It's a multi-billion-dollar annual business in this country alone. People who provide abortions make money killing little babies. And then they take their money and they buy off politicians who continue to support Roe versus Wade. Yeah, Jesus would have shuddered at the thought of such a thing. Greed, money, for human life. And from time to time here at the rectory, we get the doorbell ring when someone brings someone to the rectory who looks like the Walking Dead. I'm talking about people who are brought here out of hopelessness, who are plagued with addiction, such as crack cocaine and heroin. If you've never seen anybody like that, it's a very pathetic and sad sight. They have no color in their skin. They look like the walking dead. That's all I can say. I can only imagine what Jesus would have felt watching these people. He would have shuddered with the deepest emotions. Why? Not just because these people are using an illegal drug, but the fact that people who sell these drugs live far away in cities like Detroit, riding around in their chauffeured stretch limousines, living in their mansions and castles draped in gold and jewelry, and throwing their money around as though they were kingpins. For every sale of a drug here in Huntington, these people get more wealthy and more powerful. Human life put to the disadvantage of the almighty dollar. Yes, Jesus would have shuddered, all right, filled with the deepest of emotions. But you know, my brothers and sisters, no matter what form of evil you see in this life, what manifestation of evil in this life, the worst manifestation of evil, which is death itself, was conquered by Jesus. If you believe his words, and we must surrender to those words, he is the resurrection and the life. You see, Lazarus would die again for sure, but Lazarus would not stay dead forever. When Jesus took his cross to Calvary, when he laid down his life for his friends, when he was raised up from the dead, he went up against the power of evil once and for all, and he knocked it over for good. What this says to us, that line, I am the resurrection and the life, that when each of us closes our eyes for the last time, we will not see darkness, but rather we will see light. That's what this means. So really, what do we have to fear in this life? Personal injury, loss of home or property, whatever the case may be, those things can hurt for sure. But the thing that could have hurt us the worst, eternal death, is gone. So my brothers and sisters, especially those of you who are in the RCIA, this is the foundation of our belief. Everything that we as Catholics believe, all the little rituals, all the little things, all boil down to this statement. I am the resurrection and the life, says Jesus. May you take that statement to heart. May all fear of whatever in this life be reduced to nothing. May you know that Jesus conquered death and sin for us all. And he wants you to experience one day life that never ends.